2003, a group of 8 boys from the San Antonio Boys Village, along with 2 counselors, trekked toward Boy Scout Cave in Florida. Among them were Michael Sharrow, 15, and Javerick Henderson, 16, 2 adventurous teens eager to prove their mettle in the labyrinthine depths of the cave. Their counselors had decided to remain outside, citing their size as a limitation in navigating the tight passages. The cave was notorious for its narrow crawlways and sharp turns, but it was considered safe due to its stable structure and dry conditions. The group with just 9 flashlights began their descent shortly after noon. The temperature dropped to a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit as they moved further from the entrance. Their counselor, who had stayed behind, had set up a small campfire near the entrance to keep warm. Unbeknownst to him, this decision would add a sinister twist to the unfolding nightmare. Michael and Henderson led the group. The air was still, almost suffocatingly silent, as the boys crawled and twisted through tight passages. Despite the cave's reputation for safety, its claustrophobic confines bred unease. The further they went, the more the oppressive darkness pressed against them. About an hour into their exploration, they reached a particularly challenging section of the cave, known as the Hairpin Curve. The group stopped to assess the passage. The counselor's absence was beginning to weigh on the boys, their guidance and physical strength sorely missed in such a precarious situation. Michael, determined to lead, pushed forward into the Hairpin Curve. The Hairpin Curve passage in Boy Scout Cave was a natural bottleneck, a narrow, horizontal slit in the rock with small twists, just wide enough for a single person to crawl through. The passage then curved sharply at an almost 180-degree angle, creating a blind corner that concealed what lay beyond. Rough, damp limestone walls closed in from all sides. The floor was uneven, littered with small rocks and debris, while the ceiling pressed low, forcing anyone attempting to pass to contort their body. The passage was tight, tighter than any they had encountered so far. Michael wriggled his way through, while Henderson followed closely behind. Henderson had to contort his body, twisting and turning to navigate the sharp bend. Suddenly he stopped, unable to move forward or backward. His breathing quickened as the realization dawned on him. He was stuck, completely twisted. Michael, just in front of him, noticed his struggle and moved to help. The rest of the group waited anxiously in the wider section of the passage, their nervous chatter echoing faintly in the narrow confines. Michael crawled back, wedging himself into the cramped space to assist Henderson. The sharp limestone walls pressed against them, scraping their skin as they struggled. The cave's silence was soon replaced by the sound of panicked breathing and muffled shouts as Michael tried to free his friend. The effort was exhausting, the confined space sapping their energy and making every movement a battle. Henderson's body twisted unnaturally, wedged tightly in the unforgiving cave walls. Sharp edges dug into his ribs and hips, sending jolts of searing pain with every slight movement. His limbs' awkward bend sent relentless pressure on his entire body, making him feel as though the cave itself was crushing him alive. As the minutes turned into an hour, Michael began to feel the effects of the cold and exertion. Despite the cave's relatively mild temperature, the boys' bodies were losing heat rapidly due to their lack of movement and the constant contact with the cold limestone. And suddenly, the worst started happening. Michael's vision blurred, his muscles weakening as he continued to push and pull in an attempt to free Henderson. Without warning, Michael collapsed, his body slumping against the narrow walls. Panic surged through Henderson as he realized his friend was unconscious. Trapped and unable to move, he could only shout for help, his voice echoing through the passage. The boys waiting in the wider section of the cave were thrown into chaos. They scrambled to assess the situation, their flashlights flickering as batteries began to wear thin. The group realized they were in over their heads, with Michael unconscious and Henderson stuck. Their initial bravado turned to fear. The air felt heavy, amplifying their dread. Some of the boys began to panic, convinced the fire outside was consuming the oxygen. They decided they needed to get out at any time. The lack of oxygen will further make the situation for everyone. Every single one of them was now on borrowed time. No one wanted to leave Michael and Henderson behind, but they had no choice. Realizing they couldn't free their friends on their own, they made the difficult decision to leave Michael and Henderson behind and crawl back to the entrance to call for help. Outside, the counselors were oblivious to the unfolding disaster. When the boys reached them, out of breath and wild-eyed, he could barely explain what had happened. The counselors extinguished the fire immediately, their faces pale with realization. One of them immediately called 911, while the other decided to go back and comfort the boys, their attempts overshadowed by the gravity of the situation. Within an hour, rescue teams arrived at the scene. The first responders were experienced cavers, but even they understood the challenges ahead. Boy Scout Cave's tight passages were infamous, and navigating them while carrying equipment added another layer of difficulty. Reports of potential oxygen depletion added a sense of urgency. Inside the cave, the rescuers found the group huddled together, their faces pale and streaked with tears. The air was thick with fear and the imagined threat of suffocation. The rescuers reassured the boys while assessing the situation. Subsequent expert assessments revealed that oxygen levels in the cave were not compromised. It appeared that the initial panic had triggered a worst-case scenario mindset, leading the boys to mistakenly assume the cave's air was toxic. In reality, the air was safe, and the perceived threat had been largely psychological. Everyone was relieved to find that out. However, Michael and Henderson were still in danger. The rescue operation began swiftly. Teams entered the cave armed with specialized tools, including harnesses and chisels, to free the trapped boys. They followed the route outlined by the remaining group, their progress slow but steady. The narrow passages made carrying large amounts of gear impossible, forcing them to rely on minimal tools and their own strength. When the rescuers reached the Hairpin Curve, the sight was grim. Henderson was still conscious but visibly shaking, his skin pale and clammy. Michael lay slumped ahead him, unresponsive. The rescuers knew time was running out. Hypothermia was setting in. Despite the cave's 72-degree temperature, prolonged exposure to the rock and the lack of insulation had sapped their body heat. Henderson's speech was slurred, his movements sluggish, while Michael's shallow breathing signaled a critical state. The rescuers worked methodically, first assessing the situation before attempting to free Henderson. They used chisels to widen the narrow passage, each strike of the tool echoing ominously through the cave. The tight space made maneuvering difficult, forcing the rescuers to contort their bodies in ways that mirrored the boy's earlier struggles. It took over an hour to free Henderson. As he was pulled from the hairpin curve, he let out a sob of relief, though his body remained stiff and trembling. The rescuers quickly wrapped him in a thermal blanket and began the arduous task of moving him through the narrow passages toward the surface. With Henderson safe, attention turned to Michael. His condition was critical, his unconscious state a stark reminder of the dire situation. The rescuers worked with renewed urgency, chiseling away at the rock to create enough space to extract him. Every second felt like an eternity as they fought against the unyielding limestone. After nearly 2 hours, they finally freed Michael. His body was cold to the touch, his pulse weak but present. The rescuers carefully secured him in a harness and began the slow process of carrying him to the surface. The narrow passages made every step a challenge, the rescuers' bodies aching as they navigated the labyrinth. When they finally emerged from the cave, the scene was one of relief and urgency.